¿Se puede? No.
Okay, good morning. Can I, welcome. Bienvenue, dobro pozdravovat at our webinar, Should We Change Our Approach to Summative Assessment? My name is Arjen Day and I will be your host. We'll be live on 2 platforms today. We have the multilingual webinar on Zoom and YouTube streaming in English. Now, before we start, I would like to share some instructions for people who use Zoom. If you look down at your screen, you can see there is a little globe which says interpretation. There you can select the language that you would like to use. The language in which you will follow the webinar. So you choose the language that you want to follow the webinar in, either English, French, or Russian, and you will follow that to the very end. Also, you can find, of course, the list of participants. At the moment, we have 64 people online, and on YouTube, we will have additional ones. Also, of course, many of you have already found the chat. Now, I just want to also go a little bit through the agenda. It's on the next slide. So we will start with the welcome. Of course, this is part of what I'm doing now. Then we're going to see is what happened actually with summative assessment in 2020. And then we're going to ask you to give your views on what has happened and what you expect to happen in the future. Please, could you all close your microphones? Then we're going to look at 2 new developments in the field of assessment, 2 innovations that we see in many countries. One is authentic modular assessment, and we will look at the example of Finland. The other one, which we can find in many partner countries, is to have independent but more standardized assessment, and we will look at the example of Kazakhstan. Then we're going to look at what the literature is saying. What is the literature saying about the future of assessment? What about standardized or authentic assessment? And finally, we will have time for questions and answers and discussion. Now, this PowerPoint presentation is in English on your screen, but there is also a PowerPoint presentation available on open space. You can link with that through the chat link online that my colleagues share with you. Now, of course, it's also important that you have your mobiles with you, because we are going to use these mobiles. Whether you are in chat or Zoom, you can participate in our interactive events. And also, whether you are on YouTube or you are on Zoom, you can also ask questions to the speakers. So, why are we doing this seminar? This is the 3rd webinar in the series New Ideas for Assessment that we started because of the COVID crisis, to exchange experiences on how to deal with assessment. Assessment, and in particular summative assessment, is very much affected by COVID. It's risky to have a high-stake exam at the end where all the people have together in order to do their exam. And also, in fact, it's very difficult to do a final exam where people have to demonstrate their competences in practice online. This is so we're looking for alternative solutions how to deal with assessment. So before we go on to discuss how we will deal with these things in the future, I would like to go back to May, to our first webinar, when the people that we invited to speak were planning their final assessment. So can I ask Roberta to start the video of what we have been discussing in May?
The qualification exam would be organized in accordance with the established rule in the period in which it will be possible to conduct in safe conditions without risk to the life and the health of students.
En France, avec la dernière loi, tous les blocs de compétences ont une valeur certificative. Dès qu'une personne, un jeune, un salarié, un demandeur d'emploi avait 50% de ces blocs de compétences, il pouvait aller devant le jury pour son examen final. Ce qui nous permet d'avoir des dispositions temporaires, c'est que dès qu'un candidat a au moins 80% de ces blocs de compétences, on lui attribue le certificat sectoriel.
У нас проходит итоговая аттестация выпускных курсов. Таких студентов у нас более 145 тысяч. Она предполагает у нас две формы. Либо сдачу экзамена, либо сдачу и защиту дипломного проекта. Если сдача и защита дипломного проекта, то осуществляется в режиме онлайн.
We are talking about the final assessment in Finland. It is important to note that, in fact, there is not a single final exam. Instead, the assessment is continuous. The approach we have is individual approach, meaning that every student has a personal competence development plan, and assessment is also individual.
Such exams this year involves something like 0.8 million students. And what we did, we postponed it from early May to mid-June. The important thing is that strict precautionary measures are planned. Of course, this has to be provided for students as well as to supervising teachers. These precautionary measures have to be provided for about 1 million persons.
So you can see that there has been quite a big impact of these measures. And you could also see that countries and organizations were improvising how to find solutions by either postponing, canceling, or changing the approach to assessment. And this has led to different approaches. We were still uncertain at the time about what to expect in May, but there was hope that the situation would normalize sufficiently in the summer. And in the end, the perspective most of us had was to get back to normal as soon as possible. So let us see what has happened in reality. Now we can look back at how we dealt with these exams in the summer. And may I pass the floor now to Alistair, who is speaking to Silvio Gunku from Moldova and asking him what has happened.
Hello, my name is Silvio Gunku. I'm head of the Vocational Professional Department in the Republic of Moldova. I'm very glad to share with you our experience in the Republic of Moldova in the process of the assessment.
Silvio, tell us what has been happening in Moldova around assessments at the end of this school year.
Okay, as a result of the pandemic crisis, the priority of the Ministry of Education, Culture and Research was to secure the life and health of the students and the teacher in the educational sector. For these reasons, Ministry of Education, Culture and Research, after long analysis at the end of the academic year, proposed to the government and to the parliament a project of the decision to deliver the diploma and the certificate of the qualification to the students based on the results of the academic years from the students who finalized the study. As a result of this decision, around 12,000 of graduates of the VET schools, colleges and Center of Excellence, including the dual VET students, received the documents of the qualifications and the diploma of study. A similar decision was taken previously from the general education.
So Silvio, looking forward, what is the outlook for assessment and qualification for VET students?
In the new academic year, it was approved the new framework and the new regulation, and the important measure was taken to prevent the spread of the COVID infection. In this regard, the capacity of the school was improved. We promote a lot of training for the teacher to make possible that the students could carry out their practical activity in the school. Now, after 2 months of the reopening educational processes, we find the VET institution face successful challenges generated by the COVID-19. And now the situation is qualitative, and the institution promote a good educational process. And in this regard, the schools now are not become the place of the infection. This fact make us to believe that will be possible to, in the end of this semester and in the end of the academic year, will be possible to examine the competences of the students and to have the good evaluation process. I hope our experience is useful for you, and I wish you good luck and then the next session of the evaluation.
Thank you, Silvio. You could see that Moldova cancelled the final exams and now is planning to take more precautions for exams in 2020-21. And what happened in Egypt? A huge operation was planned there involving 1 million people. Alistair, can I hand over to you and to Dr. Mohamed Megahed?
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. My name is Mohamed Megahed. My responsibility is Deputy Minister for Technical Education in Egypt. I would like to describe to you today a few important points about assessment last year. There are assessments for the national exam that precedes granting the diploma degree, and that has to be formal. And in technical education, we have to conduct practical exams. It was scheduled for mid-May last year. We started by postponing it to June, and then it was actually conducted towards the end of August. Regarding the transitional years, the 10th grade and the students and the 11th grade students, there was several forms of assessment. Number one, there is the report that they submit on the assigned research project. We have already the results of the written exam of the first semester. And in addition to those two components, we added one third component for technical education by asking those students to come to school 2 weeks earlier in order to conduct the vocational training that they have not done on the second semester. And during this process, we also made the assessment while they are actually being introduced to these skills. I would like to talk a little bit about the new academic year that started on 17th of October. The major thing in the new academic year is that students do not attend schools all days. Why? Because we have to maintain social distancing. At home, they rely mainly on television stations. When they come to school, they do two things. They ask their teachers about the questions that they have in the lessons that they have seen in the television, and they conduct the vocational skills. How is this going to affect assessment? We have in our reform of technical education a very important pillar, which is the transformation of technical education curricula from content-based to competency-based. And we have managed to transform actually 40 curricula of 40 professions last year, 10 professions this year, and we will continue this process. We hope to end transforming all curricula by 2024. Now, the assessment in competency-based is a little bit different, as you all know. There will have to be continuous assessment during the year and a summative assessment at the end. I would like to thank everybody for hearing what I have just described briefly about the Egyptian experience in tackling the challenges made by the pandemic and how we dealt with it, how we benefited from it. And I hope our colleagues would find some of this, what we said, useful and could be made use of. And I hope the time will come soon that we could meet face to face.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. So we saw again that how difficult it is actually to plan, and the delays in Egypt were actually much longer than we hoped. But also very interesting how they switched to blended forms of VET this year, and how they use this competency-based approach for a new form of assessment. So in introducing continuous assessment of modules. Now, there was also a part of the assessment in the first seminar that was dealing with the training of people for the automobile sector in France. So let's see what happened there. Alistair, can I ask you to interview Dominique Fèvre-Piret from the automobile sector?
Bonjour, je suis très heureuse d'être parmi vous pour ce webinaire. Je suis Dominique Fèvre-Piret et je travaille à l'Association nationale pour la formation automobile en tant que déléguée générale.
Alors Dominique, racontez-nous comment s'est déroulée l'évaluation chez vous à la fin de cette année scolaire.
Donc, durant le premier semestre 2020, nous avons pu organiser 120 actions et plus d'1 millier de candidats ont pu être évalués avec un taux de réussite voisin des années précédentes. Et donc, les partenaires sociaux ont été très satisfaits des résultats et des mesures que nous avons prises. Je rappelle, pour mémoire, que les partenaires sociaux avaient décidé, faute de possibilités ou d'incertitudes sur l'organisation des jurys, d'attribuer des certificats professionnels sur la base de 80% des blocs de compétences obtenus par les jeunes. Alors, cette décision était possible parce que l'ensemble des certifications étaient organisées en blocs de compétences. Et donc, dans ce cadre-là, l'évaluation, elle est organisée par l'organisme de formation sur la base des outils que notre association avons construits. Alors, il faut également noter deux choses durant ce premier semestre. C'est que pour les actions en commerce, des entretiens de vente étaient organisés et que nous les avons réalisés à distance sans qu'il n'y ait de problème informatique du tout. Ensuite, la deuxième chose, c'est que d'habitude, nous attribuons des mentions bien, assez bien, très bien, et que durant cette période, nous n'avons pas pu le proposer aux candidats. Donc, ils avaient également la possibilité de nous demander de passer devant un jury. Et il y a 5 candidats qui ont demandé à passer au deuxième semestre devant un jury, et ce sera fait, si c'est possible, au mois de décembre.
Merci Dominique. Alors, comment se présentent les perspectives d'évaluation pour les jeunes en formation au cours de cette année?
Alors, pour la suite, bien que les partenaires sociaux ont été satisfaits des solutions qu'on avait mises en œuvre, ils ont souhaité que les jurys se déroulent quand même en présentiel dans la mesure où c'était possible, parce que pour eux, c'est important de mesurer que les acquis des jeunes soient bien au rendez-vous à l'issue de la formation. Pour eux, c'est un moyen de vérifier que les décisions qu'ils ont prises en amont, dans le contenu des compétences visées pour les métiers, et bien que le résultat soit bien au rendez-vous. Donc, il était délicat, compte tenu des circonstances et de l'incertitude qui pèse toujours semaine après semaine, de proposer le même dispositif qu'au premier semestre. Et donc, on a proposé un dispositif plus souple à plusieurs niveaux. Donc, dès que c'est possible, le jury en présentiel est organisé. Ensuite, quand il y a un problème avec un cas contact pour un jeune ou quelqu'un qui est malade dans l'équipe, à ce moment-là, on essaye d'organiser le jury à distance. Et enfin, s'il y a des conditions informatiques difficiles et qu'on ne peut pas tenir le jury à distance, eh bien, on adopte la règle que nous avions choisie au premier semestre avec une évaluation sur la base des 80% de blocs de compétences acquises. Donc, c'est un dispositif qui est très souple et qui permet d'envisager tous les cas de figure. Et je pense que dans cette période particulière, c'est effectivement l'agilité qui nous est demandée par les partenaires sociaux.
Merci beaucoup Dominique. Je pense que votre expérience va être très intéressante et valable pour tous nos auditeurs.
Je vous remercie pour votre invitation. J'espère que l'expérience que j'ai pu partager avec vous va vous être utile et je vous souhaite de très bons travaux nourris pour la suite des semaines à venir.
Merci Dominique et à bientôt.
Merci Dominique. And also, if you have any questions to any of these speakers, please put them in the chat, and we are going to deal with these questions as soon as we can. Now, it was very interesting in the case of France that they have become much more flexible in dealing with these exams. And that is something that probably we all need to think about, how we can make these systems more flexible, more adapted to certain needs. So what has actually happened in your country? And who are you actually? And what do you think about the future? I would like to pass the floor now to Jolien, my colleague, who will explain to you how you can share your experience.
Yes, thank you, Arjen. Arjen said, we would like, before we move on to the second part of this webinar, to get an idea of who you are and what happened in your country. And we will do that by using Mentimeter, because this way both our Zoom participants and our participants in YouTube will be able to answer the questions. And you can go to www.menti.com by using this QR code that is shared now on the screen, or by following the link in the chat, which will be shared by my colleagues. And what you can do is just open a browser, type the URL www.menti.com and use the code which you will see here on the screen, 4983963. I will now start sharing my screen. I think I need to get permission, yes. Just give me. I think I need to share first before I can. I see people are already entering. Welcome. Where I can see that we have people following us from the UK and Poland. Let's give everyone some time to open menti.com. And look, most participants so far from Poland. Who else do we have? I see Ukraine, Finland, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Which other countries, which regions do we have today? Montenegro. So far, 12 participants have voted. I see that we are 91 at least in Zoom. So I will wait a bit longer. So you can just open Mentimeter either in a different tab on your browser, on your laptop PC, or you can open Mentimeter on your phone. We have 15 people, 16. I now see people watching us from Italy, Latvia, Uzbekistan. I think we have more. We have more different countries. 17 voters so far. $18. So I see we have 93 participants now in Zoom. So I think we can have more votes here as well. It's going up, great. 21. And the other thing is what you will see the question is, from which country are you following us? Feel free to also type in French or Russian. I already see Russian here. We will also copy the translated questions in the chat. So in the chat, you can see the question in Russian and French as well. Okay, I think we need to start moving on to the next question, but please keep opening Mentimeter, keep entering your answers, and you will also continue with the next question once you've entered. So for the next question, we have seen the examples so far from Moldova, Egypt, and France on what were their initial plans for assessment, final assessment, summative assessment last school year, but also what happened in the end. And now we would like to hear from you. What happened to summative assessment in your country last year? How has summative assessment in VET been organized in your country last school year? The first option we have conducted as planned. Second option, postponed. The assessment has been postponed and has been maybe already conducted, but at a later point of time than initially planned. Maybe you organized alternative assessment, so the assessment has been changed in comparison to how assessment was originally planned. Assessment has been cancelled. Is the fourth option. Then the fifth option is other, or I don't know. And I see so far most votes are for conducted as planned. We have some votes for alternative assessment, cancelled ones, other ones. We see also several people who don't know how summative assessment was organized last year. So maybe we can have another alternative assessment popping up. So we see that there have been different approaches to how summative assessment has been organized in VET last year, where we still see 8 votes for conducted as planned, so at the original time and as planned. 4 votes for alternative assessment, so coming up with different ways to make the summative decision whether someone passed or failed, was able to show that she acquired all learning outcomes required for a qualification. We even have a 5th vote here, 1 vote from a country where it has been cancelled, and we have 1 other. Unfortunately, we don't. I'm very curious now. Maybe you could share in the chat what happened, and we have a couple of I don't knows. And I would like to go to the last question during this Mentimeter intermezzo, where we will also look forward, where we will start looking at what we will also discuss in the next part of the webinar. Because we had these different approaches, we had to come up with these alternatives maybe, or postponements, cancellations due to the pandemic. But is this just happening once, or did the pandemic start a debate on the form use of summative assessment in your country? So that's the question for the interpreters. Did the pandemic start a debate on the form use of summative assessment in your country? And here we just have very quick answers like yes, the first alternative, or no, the second alternative. And also here we have a third option, I don't know. And we see quite a lot of votes for yes, it did start a debate on the form use of summative assessment in your country. We have 13 votes here. And I think that's really interesting to see. And that's exactly what we would like to start with this series of webinars as well. Not to just come up with, like in our first webinar in May, to come up with a solution for summative assessment for this year, but to use this opportunity to look at how we could conduct formative and summative assessment in the coming years. And in this webinar, we will look at one of the possibilities for summative assessment. In the previous webinar, we looked at formative assessment. You can still watch this webinar as well on ETF or find it on ETF Open Space. But I think, and I hope, with the next part of this webinar, we will maybe answer some of your questions you have regarding summative assessment, and maybe we give you some ideas on what to discuss or where to look at when you have the debate on summative assessment in your countries. And I think with this note and the 14 votes for yes, I would like to pass the floor back to my colleague Arjen Dij. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolien. And I think that's could I ask people to close their microphones, please? Because we really have some disturbance now. Now, what I would like to do now is to look at how is this summative assessment going to develop? And we're trying to explore a little bit the future. And we've already seen that countries are looking for systems that are more flexible. Not everything at the end, not everything concentrated in one exam at the end, but more flexible ways of assessment. Also, there is an interest to have more exams linked to demonstrating competence, to show that people are really able to act. So that's also an aspect that we've seen. That was, for instance, explained by Egypt. Also, we've seen that employers, they want more security about the competence of people. So this has actually given the rise to new innovations in assessment that we can observe in many countries. And we're trying to look at two different schools here. So, of course, one issue is focus on learning outcomes and strengthening confidence in the assessment, so quality assurance. But also there is the idea that you have to be able to demonstrate things, how they really happen in reality. So the first thing that I would like to do is to go back to Finland. We had a short explanation about that the Finnish system was individualized. So, and that the Finnish system did not have a big exam at the end. So how does that really work? Alistair, can I go back to you? And could you go to our Finnish colleague, Kirsi Koivunen and Jana Ertovaara from Jyväskylä to explain how this works?
Hello, my name is Kirsi Koivunen. I'm coming from Finland and I'm representing Jyväskylä Educational Consortium, Gradia. We are one of the providers of vocational education and training. I've been working over 20 years in vocational education and training already in different positions, starting from the teacher, then to international affairs, and now back to development affairs.
Hello, my name is Jana Ertovaara, and I work as a VET teacher in Gradia Jyväskylä for the sector of business. I have been a teacher for 10 years, and I teach mainly young students from the age of 16 to 19-year-olds.
So Kirsi, can you tell us a little bit about how the Finnish VET system works and what is the role of evaluation in it?
In order to understand the evaluation and assessment in Finnish vocational education and training, it's good to know a little bit about the framework, about the whole system. So there are probably 3 things that you need to know about the Finnish vocational education and training system. The first thing is that it's truly a competence-based system, meaning that the National Agency of Education is defining the competence criteria for each qualification. So competence requirements and assessment criteria for each qualification. And the second thing is that our system is very flexible. So it means that we are taking into account individuals' needs. So we are making individual plans for each student. So it means that we have to assess their earlier knowledge and skills at the very beginning when we are forming personal plans for the students. And the main thing of the vocational education and training is to focus on the missing competencies and skills in order to get a formal qualification. And this system allows the students with different backgrounds to have a similar qualifications, no matter what is the age and what is the background. And the third thing is the very close cooperation with Word of Work. So we have a continuous dialogue with local industries, and our main job is to match the training needs with the local industry and train the people for the real working tasks. So it means that a very essential part of acquiring of the skills is not only happening at the schools, but also at the workplaces. So when we are talking about the assessment, we can kind of distinguish two types of assessment. So the one is kind of a continuous assessment. So students are entitled to get assessment, how they are progressing in their studies and achieving the learning outcomes or objectives. And the assessment, this continuous assessment and feedback is given by the teachers, but as well from the workplace mentors, since I already said that one essential part of the studies happen at the workplaces. And then another part of the assessment are those competence demonstrations. So in order to get a qualification, students have to participate competence demonstrations of each qualification module. Those competence demonstrations, they are taking place at the authentic working life situation. So normally in the companies or other workplaces.
So Jana, we've heard from Kirsi about the framework and the context and the theory of the thing. So can you give us a bit of a feel for what this kind of assessment means for different types of students that you have in your system?
My example case is a young initial VET student, 17 years old, who is doing the VED degree in business, and especially in the study module of profitable operations. When the student is ready for the assessment, we would agree a meeting between the student, his working life mentor, who usually operates as an assessor as well, and me as a teacher. The meeting is usually held in the company premises, in many times in the retail store back office. Both the working life assessor and the student are trained in advance in the national criteria in question. And usually for the assessment, the student prepares kind of a presentation, maybe a PowerPoint, and does his self-assessment. The assessment meeting, we start with the student's presentation. During this presentation, the company assessor stays more in the background, does not interfere or give more information during the assessment, but his role is to monitor the validity and depth of the student's knowledge and information. After the presentation, we move on to the assessment. We take out the national criteria, the forms, and we start going through the evaluation. Usually in the beginning, the student gives his self-assessment and maybe also gives some concrete examples of his working and the performance and skills in the work where he has been showing his skills. After the self-assessment, the company assessor gives feedback to the student and also offers information for the assessment. He has information how the student has performed and what his skill level has been during the monitoring period. After we cover all the assessment criteria in question, we move on for the final assessment and defining on the grade for the student. After we define the grade, the final grade for the study module for the student, we move on to documenting the grade. The grade is documented with, of course, the final note from 1 to 5, but also with the company name, so that in the evaluation it shows from which sector this assessment is given. And we also define in doing what work tasks this skill has been demonstrated. After we define the grade, we sign the final documents, and all three of us would sign the document. We usually would shake hands, not in this time that we are having, but usually handshakes, and hopefully we would all be happy with the assessment, and that would finalize our assessment meeting. Thank you very much for your interest in the Finnish assessment system. Farewell and good luck for developing your system for your students in your country.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to share some insights about the Finnish vocational education and training and assessment in it. I wish you a very fruitful discussions about the assessment in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues from Finland. It's incredible to see how important assessment is. And it actually doesn't end with assessment, but it begins with assessment. In the beginning, there is assessment to see what kind of things people still have to learn. And then, of course, there's this continuous assessment that continues throughout the process. So that's quite a different way of looking at assessment. Also, interesting how these competency demonstrators take place in companies rather than in schools. And they use very different approaches to assessment, including self-assessment by the learners, and also by verifying the learning outcomes together. So is this the future for assessment? This is one of the questions, and please keep your questions coming. I see there are also some questions, and I know that you would like to ask them and start discussing them, but we would like to continue at the moment to have still some other perspectives before we're going to open the discussion. And please do write your questions in the chat. We are going to deal with them. So now first, let's look at another approach in Kazakhstan. And we have seen in many countries, many of our partner countries, that employers were especially dissatisfied with the exams of the fact systems that have been assessing more the curriculum than the skills of the students. And some of those countries have developed initiatives to make sure that is changing. So I would like to introduce Rashida Shakinova, who has established a sectoral assessment center for tourism and hospitality sector in Kazakhstan. And my colleague, Maria Lvova, is going to interview her. Arjen to Maria, please, can we go to Kazakhstan?
Доброе утро. Меня зовут Рашида Шайкенова. Я являюсь директором Казахстанской туристской ассоциации и президентом Гостиничной ассоциации Казахстана.
Рашида, расскажите, пожалуйста, как организован процесс оценивания, какие этапы оценивания и кто может быть допущен к нему?
Сертификация у нас проходит в два этапа. Первый этап – это теоретический, второй этап – это оценивание практических навыков. Кто может пройти? Любой человек, который хочет получить сертификат по заявленной специальности, по которой мы работаем. Значит, к нему тоже есть определенные требования. Должна быть подана заявка, должен быть предоставлен некий пакет документов, подтверждающих, что этот человек работает в этой отрасли и имеет, если не диплом об этом, по заявленной специальности, то он имеет обучение на краткосрочных курсах или имеет обучение на рабочем месте. И при выполнении всех этих условий мы знакомим заявителя с процедурой сертификации, мы знакомим с правилами сертификации и с требованиями всех необходимых моментов. И допускаем этого человека к сертификации, который обязан пройти сначала теоретическое тестирование, затем, при условии, что он прошел теоретическое тестирование и получил необходимое количество баллов, а у нас это определено, при каком количестве баллов прописана эта процедура, он может пойти на второй этап, уже на практическое тестирование, на оценивание его практических навыков. Мы работаем в индустрии гостеприимства, в туризме и в сфере общественного питания.
Скажите, а какие методы используются при оценивании?
При оценивании используются различные методы. Это тестирование, это решение ситуационных задач, это кейс-задачи, это устное собеседование со специалистами отрасли. Оценивание навыков зависит от квалификации. Естественно, что мы это делаем в соответствии с национальной рамкой квалификации, с отраслевой рамкой квалификации, в соответствии с уровнями. И первая часть тестирования проходит через определенные отработанные задания, а вторая часть проходит, если эта квалификация нуждается в оценивании на рабочем месте, то мы это делаем на рабочем месте. Если это горничная, значит, мы это делаем в отеле. Если это повар, то мы делаем на кухне. Официант показывает свои навыки, демонстрирует в зале по приему гостей.
Скажите, Рашида, самый сложный вопрос, а как обеспечивается качество оценивания?
Ну, понятно, что для того, чтобы обеспечить качество оценивания, что очень важно для самой процедуры сертификации, разработанные в нашем сертификационном центре разработаны процедуры, разработаны стандарты, и комиссия по оцениванию и сам оцениваемый обязаны придерживаться всех этих стандартов и всех этих прописанных процедур. Мы обязательно основываемся в первую очередь на наших профессиональных стандартах, которые мы разработали несколько лет тому назад. Они признаны государством, входят в реестр профессиональных стандартов Национальной палаты. И в соответствии с этими профессиональными стандартами участниками рынка труда как раз и были разработаны тестовые задания для теоретического оценивания и практические задания для практического оценивания практических навыков. И вот основой всего являются как раз профессиональные стандарты. В состав экзаменационной комиссии для того, чтобы обеспечить качество, входят аттестованные эксперты по оценке персонала. Они проходят обычно обучение в одной из государственных структур в институте при системе госстандарта, получают свои сертификаты, и тоже размещены их данные в государственном реестре, то есть это известные люди, и обязательно в комиссию, которая состоит из не менее 3 человек, входят эксперты рынка труда, которые имеют стаж работы не менее 5 лет. И через эти моменты мы, конечно, стремимся как раз и обеспечить качество.
Скажите, а есть ли какие-то стандартные критерии, шкала оценивания, по которой вы проводите оценку теоретической части и практической части?
Да, конечно. Значит, когда мы оцениваем теоретическую часть, с учетом того, что мы сертифицируем выпускников высших учебных заведений и выпускников ТИПО, у нас стандарт разработан следующий, что, вернее, критерии. Из 100 вопросов на теоретические вопросы обязательно должны быть положительные ответы не менее чем на 60. Если мы имеем сертифицируемого из отрасли, работника отрасли, то это 75 из 100. А что касается оценивания практической части, то это обычно зачтено, не зачтено. И представители рынка труда, которые чаще всего именно эту часть оценивают, они как раз ставят эту оценку. А вот кто подводит уже, кто выставляет конечную оценку, прошел, не прошел, и решает вопрос о выдаче сертификата, это тоже независимый эксперт-аудитор, который не является членом комиссии. Он не входит в состав комиссии. Он получает все результаты как теоретического, так и практического тестирования и принимает решение о выдаче сертификата.
Спасибо большое, Рашида. А скажите, пожалуйста, для человека, который проходит оценивание, самый главный вопрос: признается ли подобный сертификат государством?
Ну, это самый на сегодняшний день болезненный вопрос, потому что пока еще в нашем государстве законодательно процедура независимой отраслевой сертификации никак не закреплена. Но нам обещают, что это будет. Но в то же время для того, чтобы обеспечить валидность, для того, чтобы обеспечить доверие, для того, чтобы наш сертификат был востребованным на рынке труда, мы получили аккредитацию в нашем госоргане по системе сертификации, и мы имеем этот знак аккредитации. Ниже есть наш сертификат, и там есть два логотипа. Один логотип – это нашего сертификационного центра, а второй – это логотип знака аккредитации, указывающий на то, что наш центр внесен в государственный реестр аккредитованных сертификационных центров в Казахстане.
Скажите, пожалуйста, очень важный вопрос. Как отличается оценивание практических знаний от теоретических?
Ну, этот процесс очень серьезно отличается. Если, предположим, оценивание теоретических знаний проходит в аудитории, в помещении, через компьютер, то практическая часть – это обязательно на рабочем месте, если это соответствующие специальности, которые должны показать практические навыки. Я говорила об этом уже, если это повара, официанты и так далее. Если это экскурсоводы, то это обязательно экскурсия по городу, который должен провести экскурсовод и показать свои практические знания и навыки. Если это турагент, то он должен разработать какую-то практическую работу, но это уже в зависимости от заявленной квалификации проводятся систематически такие оценивания практические. Вообще мы своей основной целью ставим не столько теоретические оценивания теоретических знаний, потому что это все-таки делается в учебных заведениях, это делается при обучении на каких-то курсах и так далее. Мы все-таки акцент делаем на оценку практических навыков, и поэтому присутствие в нашей комиссии представителей рынка труда как раз с этим связано, для того, чтобы мы могли увидеть, насколько человек готов сегодня войти в отрасль и быть полезным на предприятии.
Спасибо большое вам, Рашида, спасибо за это интересное интервью.
Спасибо большое вам, спасибо большое Европейскому фонду образования за интерес к нашей деятельности. Пользуясь случаем, хочу сказать спасибо еще раз Европейскому фонду образования, потому что благодаря именно нашему участию в проектах ЕФО нам удалось первыми в стране разработать профессиональные стандарты и выйти на систему квалификации. Я буду очень рада ответить на все ваши вопросы и желаю успешному проведению данного вебинара.
Спасибо, огромное спасибо для Рашиды. I would also like to actually come back to some of the issues that was raised in this presentation. You can see how much care is taken to ensure that the quality of the assessment process is guaranteed, and it's addressed to different learners from different ages, and that they really meet the competences that are in the occupational standards. Also, it's actually strange that this very careful approach is still not recognized in the country. So you can see it's always difficult to start developing new things. Now, I know that we have about 5-6 questions, but I would like to actually give the floor first to Janet, and then we will really open for discussion so that we really have also more questions coming, and questions also to the speakers and to the others about how we're going to address these issues and what are your views on those innovations. Now, first, let me introduce Janet. Janet Looney, she's the director of the European Institute of Education and Social Policy in Paris, and she's also editor of the Journal of Education. Janet has done a literature study on innovative practices on assessment for ETF as part of our Creating New Learning initiative. And she is looking at important trends. And she's going to explain some key concepts behind authentic and standardized assessment. So I would now like to pass the floor to Janet.
Okay, good morning.
Yes.
You can hear me fine? Okay, first, thank you for inviting me. I'm really appreciating the opportunity to participate. As Arjen mentioned, we're going to be looking at authentic versus standardized assessments. So just to start out with the basic concepts, I think all of you are familiar with these, but to review them, assessments need to be valid, they need to be fair, and they need to be reliable. So when we say valid, it means they need to measure what they're intended to measure, that the information gathered about student performance is used to support the claims that we're making about student competence. Saying they're fair means that they need to consider the learner's needs and characteristics, that we're eliminating bias. And saying they're reliable, this is particularly important for large-scale assessments for high stakes. It means that the results can be replicated over time and across different sites for different students. That's also another aspect of fairness. We know that everyone is being assessed by the same standards. Okay, may I have the next slide, please? Okay, so as I mentioned, this is standardized versus authentic, or else we could also say performance-based assessments that we're looking at. The reason that we talk about these two in contrast is because they're two different ways of measuring, and they both have strengths and shortcomings. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so standardized assessments are usually preferred for the large scale high stakes assessments. They also may be used on a regular basis by teachers, but they're lower stakes. As they're defined by the International Bureau of Education, the kind of standardized assessments we're looking at are tests that are administered and scored under uniform conditions. So these are the kinds of end of year tests or ones just before graduation. We're probably all familiar with the paper and pencil test where we fill in bubbles and then they're machine scored. These typically feature closed-ended questions. We answer them with multiple choice, true, false, perhaps a short answer. And that way everyone is looking at exactly the same assessments. They are more reliable because everyone is doing the same thing. But they may be less valid for measurement of complex competences because it's difficult to capture thinking processes and ability to look at higher order skills in a short answer closed question. And they're also difficult, they pose difficulties in terms of measuring routine tasks that need to be performed face-to-face. Yeah, the next slide, please. Okay, in terms of authentic and performance-based assessments, these are the kinds of tasks that our speakers have already also referred to in terms of showing what you can do in the workplace. They may include something more complex where you're demonstrating a problem-solving capacity, or they may involve something routine. We can also look at online forms of performance-based assessments that could include simulations, multimedia portfolios with videos showing what you can do, essays that give more detail on how you're thinking about a problem, team problem work, which can also work in an online portfolio, or interviews talking through your own thinking processes. We also remember that in work-based settings, those are opportunities to demonstrate skills in the specific context of that workplace. One issue that we do need to think about is that every workplace is different. So an assessment in one workplace may not be the same as for another, but this is indeed the nature of competence-based learning. The disadvantage of these types of assessments is that they can't be machine scored. Here we have human raters and juries. We saw some examples. Typically, they will work with an assessment tool, something like a rubric that outlines the standards and the criteria for judging the quality of a performance, whether it's poor, good, very good, or excellent. There may need to be some investment in training of jurors or the assessors, because everyone has a different kind of view of what those standards mean. So we need to make sure that everyone shares the same meaning. And typically, when they have training, we find that these types of assessments can be very reliable. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so here we want to talk about balancing the pros and cons of these different types of assessments, which have different validity and reliability. One approach to doing this is to have both types of assessments, so that we're using both the standardized assessments and the performance-based assessments, and that way they have a bit of both aspects to them. These are called complex assessments, and they are more and more used. An advantage of this is also that when we have several assessments, we're able to assess more skills and competences and types of knowledge. So when we have more assessments over time, we cover more of the curriculum, and we're less likely to teach to the test, which is one of the dangers of high stakes assessments. So many assessments over time. And finally, I'll just mention that there is a great deal of interest in the world of assessment and designing ICT-based assessments that can do everything. So they could be used for virtual reality. They could use virtual reality simulations, for example, to measure a large number of students and to also balance the validity and reliability claims. We are some ways away from having that kind of long-term goal for the ideal assessment, but there is a great deal of interest and much research and development underway. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you for giving this explanation and showing the principles behind the innovations. Now it's time for questions, and we really have already received quite a lot of questions. So I presume that and I would like you to ask more of them. So I would first like to go for some questions for Kersi Koivunen and Jana. There are some questions coming in. One of them was, what do you mean by defining grade by the student himself at the moment of assessment? So this is about the self-assessment that is taking place in Finland. How are you dealing with that? How do you grade actually the assessment? So this is the question for Kersi. Can we go to Kersi to answer this question?
So, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it was about the grading.
It's about the self-assessment of the students, and how is that linked with the grading?
Yeah, the self-assessment of the student does not affect on grading as such. What I meant on my presentation was that the students, when we are speaking about the continuous assessment, it means that the student has to assess their skills and competencies in order to reflect their own learning. And that is kind of a part of the learning process as such. But when it comes to the competence demonstration, the students should assess their performance, but as such, their assessment has not effect on grading as such. It's up to the assessors, like a teacher representative and the workplace representative, to decide the grading. So that is the case. Yeah.
Okay, so, and then another question for you. That is about how do you use, because you talked about, okay, we're using online, we're using also other approaches. How can competences for craft skills be assessed online? Is that actually possible? So what kind of assessment environment do you need for that?
Well, in craft skills, I think in modern life, all sort of we have all these digital things that we can use in assessment, and we should actually use them. And I think it's also possible in craft skills, although it means that you have to plan the competence demonstration well in advance. And it also depends on the module that you are showing your competencies. So when it's very much about the process-based, when the assessors are assessing the working process, so you should be able to, we should have the communications or digital environments where we can follow the processes as such. So what it requires the technical equipments that we are able to do that. But then I think the modern mobile phones are very handy as such. But well, there are kind of two kind of things. So it's kind of a recorded things that you can do as a part of your competence demonstration, but also like a online communication when you are doing the competence demonstration and showing the process itself, and having the assessors either one at the workplace and one at the school, for instance. I don't know whether that explained anything. Yeah.
Oh, so thank you for that answer. Let's go to Rashida. Rashida, для вас несколько вопросов. I have some questions for you. So the first one is about what happens if students fail, or is failure not foreseen? Do you simply say the student is competent or not yet competent? Rashida, vi poněli vопросы, да? Now, if we can't answer the question now, then we will answer it later on open space, because all your questions will be answered. And Rashida, as soon as you are able to connect, please let us know. We will come back to you. Now I move on to Janet.
All right.
Yes. Janet, there's a question from you from Ukraine, from Vladimir Kovtunets, and he says, let me see. Now, there was a question from the UK. Is it possible to have both standardized and authentic assessment? Are they not, they can be combined, can't they?
Yes, they can be combined. Essentially, they measure different types of knowledge. I should be careful to say it's not impossible to design a standardized assessment that can measure more complex assessments, but they are more difficult to design and more costly to do that careful design. It's better for especially vet education. You really want to demonstrate specific skills to have the two. You can decide which types of knowledge and which type of evidence you want to gather with each one, and use both, as well as continuous assessment to have a final grade.
Yes, okay. Then I have also another question about, it's more a general question, and we will have to see who will answer this. Is there any evidence of any colleagues about the use of e-portfolios for the systematic recording of skills and competences? Maybe Kirsi, this is an instrument that you're using, possibly, or maybe Janet, this is something that you saw in the literature. Could we have your answers? Can I start with Janet?
Okay, sure. Yes, this is a method that's used. In doing the research for the review, we were looking for up-to-date examples, and one example I found was from Norway, for example, where initial teacher education students were using shared portfolios to correct each other's work and to have their final collective grade using a variety of products. There's also a few examples at school level of how these are used. And again, the online platform allows a lot of collective work, which is really helpful for developing people's own assessment skills as well.
And can I ask Kirsi, I saw that also in Finland you sometimes use portfolio. Could you say something about it? Maybe also in the beginning when you look at this first validation of non-formal, informal learning, when you have people coming in. Could you say something?
Yeah, the e-portfolios, I was kind of trying to scan the different educational sectors if we are fully using the e-portfolios as a kind of a assessment of competencies for qualification modules, and I cannot come up with any of the sectors, but I know that it's partly used. So as a part to kind of record your working, the kind of end products of your work at the workplaces in order to kind of use them as a part of your assessment process. So it's partly used, but not completely as to show the whole competencies for certain qualification module.
Thank you very much. So now I would like to go back to another question. It is about the quality assurance of assessment. We saw in Kazakhstan that there was really a lot of measures to make sure the assessment center was accredited. There was a strict approach to the theoretical knowledge that was tested online or using also the standardized approach, combined with the practical approach. And also they were different in their rating in order to make sure that people would be, let's say, really competent. So in the case of Finland, it's a much more individualized approach. So could I ask Kirsi again, how are you actually making sure that these results are comparable? Is there any process of moderation? So comparing different assessment results, standardization or validation of the outcomes? Is somebody looking at the outcomes after the exam? Could you say something about this, Kirsi?
Yeah. So as you said, it's very much individual. And when we are speaking about the standards are the kind of a national assessment criteria, which are qualification-based standards. So the assessment criteria is defined by those qualification criteria. But then it's always the kind of a question whether the assessment when it's happening in the different workplaces, whether it's kind of a fair for each parties, or whether it can be validated, or maybe I'm not finding the right word at the moment, but well, so whether it's kind of a whether it's a similar quality, that's always the question. But then we count on the kind of because we are training the workplace mentors who are making the assessment, so they are kind of a competent and they are professional and they know the competent assessment criteria. So that is the one kind of a quality thing here as well. But then certainly, I mean, if the students are kind of thinking that they are getting an unfair, they are being assessed unfairly, so they have kind of a route to kind of complain about the assessment. And in national level, we are having kind of a working life committees. And if students want to complain about the assessment, they can turn to working life committees in order to see whether it's the assessment is okay. And then the working life committees, the national working life committees, they are also kind of a monitoring the quality of the competence demonstrations, but then there are not kind of anybody who is kind of categorizing different education providers, how well they have been doing in this or something like that. I don't know whether I answered to your question, but
yes. So I mean, what I understand is that you do more, you evaluate more the approaches rather than that you correct them directly. Let's say it's a more indirect approach to the quality assurance. And you, of course, put a lot of trust in the assessors, which I think is also a very strong point of your approach. But it's not so standardized in quality assurance as in the Kazakh approach. Can I go to Rashida? I see you're there, Rashida. And I see you're probably listening to the translation. So can I ask you the questions that are there? One of the first question was about, could you turn on your microphone? Можете включить ваш микрофон, пожалуйста. Да. Вот. Rashida, what happens if students fail? Or don't they fail? Are they just considered not yet competent? And did they get another opportunity to do the exam again?
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Я приветствую вас из Казахстана. Да, мы проводим процедуру сертификации. Все мы знаем прекрасно, что это достаточно новое явление. Особенно у нас в Казахстане, если мы раньше имели сертификацию различных товаров и так далее, то процедура сертификации для персональных явлений. Мы работаем совсем недавно, 3 года в этой области. Ошибаемся, ищем новые пути и не отрезаем возможность нашим, если он не смог с первого раза сдать 2 этапа, первый теоретический экзамен и второй практически, то мы, конечно же, позволяем ему вернуться еще раз и попробовать свои силы в повторной сертификации, в повторных экзаменах.
Okay, so let me translate this question for the YouTube watchers. So they have, of course, this system of personnel certification, which is really new. They have 3 years of experience and they are developing it, learning by doing. And yes, if people fail, they have a chance to redo the exam. So that is the first stage is always the theoretical exam, then follows the practical exam. And if they fail, they will get another chance. Okay, can I also ask you another question, Rashida? This was a question from, about your certificates. Признан ли ваш сертификат в отрасли? Are your certificates recognized in the sector of tourism? Rashida?
Да-да, формально, неформально, да. Сегодня работодатели ориентируются на наш сертификат. Но в стране еще нет никакого законодательства, которое бы обязывало работодателей при приеме на работу требовать у претендента на конкретную должность сертификата. Это путь, по которому мы сейчас двигаемся и работаем с правительством и с рынком работодателей.
Thank you very much. So just to translate for the YouTube watchers. So informally, the diplomas are recognized by the sector because also they've been developing them. But formally, they still need a formal diploma or certificate. And that is why the sector is working closely with the government to make sure that these diplomas are being recognized. Then there was also a question from Tunisia for you. What are the assessment alternatives to replace the practical evaluation? Are there any assessment alternatives to replace the practical evaluation under the situation of COVID?
Я правильно поняла, Ариан, что это вопрос ко мне?
Да, к вам.
Да. Значит, Ну, у нас в учебных заведениях есть оценивание знаний, но оценивания практических навыков нет. И поэтому это новая процедура оценивания. Пока мы видим это вот в сертификации отраслевой, независимой. И очень важно, что в этот процесс вовлечены в первую очередь сами работодатели. Они сами оценивают при помощи аккредитованных специалистов по сертификации, и независимый человек тоже принимает решение об окончательной выдаче процедуры оценивания. Альтернатив пока других у нас нет.
So, just to answer shortly, the question that was asked, there is not really an alternative to a real assessment by people who are coming from the sector and see that people are able to demonstrate their competences. So I just have to look at the time. We have about 10 minutes left, so that I would say we have 5 minutes still left for questions. So I can see if I find some other questions here. There is a general question here about the problem with transversal skills. Transversal skills that are not specific for one occupation. There's a common agreement that they are very important. And we're thinking about communication, critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration. So also there is a lot of different opinions about what kind of transversal skills people need. There are a long list of different organizations that are developing them. How are we assessing them? Could I have maybe Janet, could you say something about the assessment of key competences and transversal skills?
Sure. I think my reaction to the questions is that these transversal skills are embedded in the competences that are being measured. So part of the challenge for assessors is to define what that should look like for the specific competence being measured. So what does critical thinking look like? What does, for a specific problem that needs to be solved, what does teamwork look like? What does creativity look like? Within teamwork, we might be able to measure some level of social emotional skills. So these are not disembodied, and we need to think about that aspect and surface those aspects in each area. Of course, there's way within a course to help students assess their own capacity in those areas so that they can develop them further. But I would not imagine that those would be included in the certification process.
Okay, then I have a question for Dominique, but I don't know if she's online. So let's have a check whether she's here. I don't see her here for the moment. So maybe that's a question that we will going to deal with in open space. So then let me see what other questions we have here. Yes, there is here a question also about the certificate on validation of non-formal and informal learning. Does it give the right to continue learning at the next level? Is this a question for Kersi? So can you also obtain all the skills through the validation non-formal and formal learning in Finland? And does it then also allow you to go to the next level? How does this work actually, this validation of formal and informal learning in the Finnish system?
Well, recognition of informal and non-formal learning is kind of integrated of the whole system. So once the students are entering, for instance, vocational education and training, so we are kind of obliged to recognize whether they have a non-formal or informal learning, and it's part of the competence demonstration if they do have a skills, but they do not have a kind of a formal certification about those things. So competence demonstrations are the way to show that they do have the competencies required by the qualification framework. And once they have shown those competencies and we have come to a conclusion that they have those skills and competencies, so they are entitled to have a validation, and then finally the whole qualification, once they have achieved all whole modules for the qualification, and then they are entitled to continue to higher education if they wish to. So apply to higher education. Arjen, if you're speaking, so your microphone.
Yes, thank you very much, Kirsi. So I think we have to close the questions here because our time is almost up. But we're going to address all these questions on open space. And please go to open space because we are not finished with assessment yet. Actually, what we see is that because of the COVID crisis, we've started to challenge some of the status quo that we have in many countries, and we're now trying to find new ways of dealing with these things. And actually, if you look at the new skills strategy of the European Union, it is very much focused on lifelong learning, also for that. So looking much more at assessing the skills of adults and combining, for instance, validation, non-formal, informal learning with training, much more focused on smaller bits, so more on giving people micro-credentials or partial qualifications. So it is really changing our approach to assessment, and we really would like to see what's happening in different countries, and would like to really see how you are going to have a discussion in your own country on these things. And we would like to develop a new type of webinars, not the ones that we have so far, these big ones with a lot of questions, etc., and discussion, but really dig deep and work with people who are multipliers in trying to see how is assessment changing, not only summative assessment, but also a formative assessment, especially in VET systems where students are becoming more the driver of their own learning. This formative assessment, the assessment for learning to give them feedback for their learning, will become much more important. So we really invite everybody who thinks that they will be a multiplier in their country. We can only have people there who are multipliers, because we would like to have less participants in these webinars. We will have them only in one language, either in English or French or Russian. So we will have them in all three languages. And we would like to really address how we can work on assessment in our countries, because we really think that the situation that has started this year, it's not just going back to normal in 2022. We are actually witnessing a change in assessment. Now, before I end and wrap up this webinar, I really would like to make sure that you are also filling out our feedback form. It's very important that you are giving us feedback on this webinar so that we can be more effective in the future. So please use your phone or your device to go to the feedback form using this QR code. Now, I would like to really thank everybody very much for their active role in this webinar. It has been an important webinar, I think, and we can really see that the issue of summative assessment is not straightforward. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us. The issues of the transversal competences, how do we assess them? How do we make sure our assessments are valid? How do we make sure we avoid high stake, high risk assessments at the end? How do we make sure assessment is also quality assured so that we can have trust in the certificates that are being issued? So these are all issues that are really very important for all countries that are developing. We're training, of course, people because they have to develop the competences, but also we would like them to get the assurance that they are competent in the end. So assessment is an important part of that. So I really would like to thank you all for your participation. I would really like to thank the interpreters for their role, because without interpretation, we could not have these multilingual webinars. Thank you very much for all the speakers who shared their experience. And thank you all for participating. And these are the next steps for our, we are going to announce these interactive online events in January. So please follow us on Open Space. There is a paper developed by Janet on formative and summative assessment that is coming out soon. And also please participate in the discussion on Open Space. Thank you all. Благодарю вас. Merci pour votre participation. Au revoir. До свидания. See you soon. Thank you.